La tristeza ha subido 2 puntos. Ya hay escasez de palomas que asesinaron al anciano que...
En 1775, tras la muerte de su padre Luis XV, el joven Luis XVI, un prometedor príncipe, considerado genial en temas como la lógica, geometría y astronomía, con tan solo 19 años ascendió al trono de Francia. Un reformista por convicción, él creía que la corona no tenía un derecho divino, sino que debía gobernar en función del pueblo. Una vez rey, lo primero que hizo fue despedir a los más odiados ministros del anterior reinado. Luego restauró el Parlamento de París, el fruto de un primer intento de democratización. En cierta manera, la Revolución Francesa no fue solo un repentino levantamiento producto de la enorme desigualdad social de ese entonces, sino un proceso de mutuo reconocimiento de que el sistema no funcionaba. El joven rey y la sociedad buscaban el cambio y juntos daban pasos hacia un nuevo sistema. La principal reforma era eliminar los privilegios feudales y establecer un impuesto de igual porcentaje para todos los habitantes de Francia. Esta era solo una de una serie de reformas aún más profundas. Luis XVI era un rey muy joven y muy revolucionario. Sin embargo, todos sabemos que en la vida los peores enemigos están ocultos y te sonríen. Y las intrigas alrededor del trono es donde se oculta el verdadero poder tras el poder. Tiempo después, Luis XVI fue arrestado y decapitado. Esto motivó una aún mayor separación entre el pueblo y la realeza, que vio cómo le fue pagado a Luis XVI su deseo de reforma y justicia social. Pudo motivar también la idea de que es más seguro gobernar sin ser la cabeza del poder. De vuelta al presente, está muy claro que Occidente y sus corporaciones tienen todo el poder de destruir, luego reconstruir y ganar mucho dinero exprimiendo países como Irak o Libia. Al mismo tiempo, parece que económica y socialmente estos países de Occidente, particularmente Estados Unidos, están pasando un mal rato. Y sobre todo, bajo ninguna circunstancia han declarado formalmente ninguna intención de ser un imperio. Entonces, ¿existe o no un imperio? Sean ustedes los jueces. En este reportaje especial les presentamos la historia de El Comité de los 300 y la Pirámide del Poder, revisando el trabajo de autores como John Coleman y David Icke. El Comité de los 300 es un libro que, de ser verdad, digamos que sería una verdadera bóveda de sorprendentes secretos sobre por qué las cosas están como están en el mundo. Ojo, yo no digo que todo esto sea verdad. De hecho, es casi imposible verificarlo o negarlo. Por favor, sean ustedes quienes investiguen más y decidan si este libro es acertado o no. De acuerdo a John Coleman, su autor, el poder de Occidente y a través de este, el mundo, está gobernado por un grupo de poderes actuando en conjunto y coordinados desde hace casi 3 siglos por un grupo de 300 personas que forman un superpoderoso y secreto cartel que ha conseguido dominar el oro, el petróleo y el tráfico de drogas en todo el mundo. Y que utilizando agencias no gubernamentales, bancos, corporaciones y universidades, ha ido poco a poco colocando a su gente en los más altos escalafones de cada uno de los más importantes gobiernos. No solo el poder económico de Occidente, el poder militar de la OTAN, el control social de los gobiernos o el control cultural de las corporaciones de media, sino el control del comercio de las drogas y del crimen organizado garantizarían la dominancia del Comité de los 300 sobre la mayoría de habitantes del planeta. Supuestamente fundado en 1727 en Inglaterra, fruto de una alianza entre las más poderosas casas bancarias europeas de la época y un cartel que producía y traficaba opio en la India, China y el resto del sudeste asiático, el grupo de los 300 ha ido construyendo su poder utilizando los bancos centrales para controlar y eventualmente dominar la economía de los individuos y de sus gobiernos. Financiando ambos lados de las guerras y de movimientos sociales, esta élite se asegura que no importa quién gane las confrontaciones o elecciones y gobierne los países, las deudas de guerra permitirán controlar fácilmente a naciones e individuos, además de debilitar cualquier nación o líder que se atreva a oponerse. Según Coleman, Luis XVI, el zar Nicolás y John F. Kennedy son algunas de las más famosas víctimas de este gobierno secreto de la élite mundial. Justamente John F. Kennedy fue uno de los presidentes norteamericanos que se atrevieron a hablar en público sobre este grupo secreto. Otro presidente que habló de esto fue Woodrow Wilson. En 1913, el mismo año de la publicación de la ley que creaba el Banco de la Reserva Federal, en su libro La Nueva Libertad, el presidente Wilson dijo lo siguiente: Algunos de los más poderosos hombres en Estados Unidos, en el campo del comercio e industria, tienen miedo de alguien, tienen miedo de algo. Saben que hay un poder en alguna parte, tan organizado, tan sutil, tan vigilante, tan intrincado, tan omnipresente, que solo se atreven a susurrar cuando critican este poder. Nos hemos convertido en uno de los peor gobernados, uno de los gobiernos más completamente controlados y dominados en el mundo civilizado. Ya no somos un gobierno de opinión libre, ni de convicción y el voto de la mayoría, sino el gobierno de la opinión y crueldad de un pequeño grupo de hombres dominantes. De acuerdo a muchos autores, varias sociedades secretas históricamente han permeado gobiernos e instituciones internacionales. Piensen en el Da Vinci Code, el Código de Da Vinci, o en las películas de 007. Ambos casos fueron inspirados por verdaderas sectas secretas y agencias de inteligencia privadas. Estas sociedades secretas están relacionadas con agrupaciones religiosas o universidades. Un caso comprobado y abiertamente declarado es el de la secta Skulls and Bones o Huesos y Calaveras. Fundada en 1932 en la elitista Universidad de Yale, esta secta secreta ha incluido a ilustres miembros de la sociedad, presidentes, jueces de la Corte Suprema, secretarios de defensa, agentes de inteligencia, senadores, consejeros económicos de presidente, secretarios del Tesoro, banqueros y megaempresarios. Esto asegura un vínculo común intergeneracional entre miembros. Esto les permite grandes ayudas en sus carreras a la cima y también permite conexiones desconocidas para el público común. Un gran ejemplo de esto. En 2004, George Walker Bush, cuyo padre también fue un Skull and Bones, ganó las elecciones presidenciales representando al Partido Republicano. Su rival del Partido Demócrata fue John Kerry. Bush y Kerry no son solo primos lejanos, sino que ambos son miembros de esta secta secreta. Les presento a David Icke, un muy controversial escritor y orador inglés. Ha dado conferencias en 25 países, sus libros han vendido decenas de miles de copias y han sido traducidos a 8 lenguajes. Su página web tiene un promedio de 600,000 visitas por semana. David nos explica sobre la estructura piramidal del poder.
There's two types of control. There's one that has a finite life, and there's one that has an infinite life until it's exposed. The one that has a finite life is the form of control where you, the subjugated people, know who your tyranny is, you know who your dictator is. It goes under names like fascism, communism, apartheid. You know where you stand. It's not nice, you know where you stand. And therefore, you can focus on and target the people that are controlling you, and eventually, it could take a long time, there will be some kind of overthrow, like we've seen around the world. The greatest form of human control is a control that you can't see, touch, or taste. Symbolically, you're sitting in a prison cell, but you can't see the bars. And people do not do anything about the fact that they're not free when they think they are free. So what these families did when the colonial powers apparently withdrew from the former colonies is they left out in those countries the bloodline families under different names, often taking on the names of the country they've colonized, and the secret society network through which they imposed their will and put themselves in power through covert manipulation. If you think of a transnational corporation, look how it's structured. You've got the headquarters in some country or other, usually North America or Europe. In terms of the operational level of this global conspiracy, it's in Europe. Now, the headquarters dictates the global policy of the corporation. And in each country are subsidiary companies to the headquarters corporation, and these subsidiary companies act and work and carry out the dictates of the headquarters. That's how it works, like a gigantic spider's web. This is exactly the way the structure of this Illuminati global control works. You've got the operational headquarters in Europe, and in each country is a subsidiary network of bloodline families and secret societies whose job it is to control that country's governments, any party that has a chance of forming a government, corporations, cartels, whatever, media at ownership level, and education, policy, military, etc. And so when the central operational headquarters of this Illuminati global spider's web says this happens now and this happens now and this happens now, all these different networks in different countries start to introduce that agenda, centrally dictated, in their sphere of influence. And this is why when I travel around the world, I find the same changes taking place in country after country, justified by the same excuses. And sometimes even the legislation is worded the same. This is the structure that allows the few to control the many. But like I keep emphasizing, the many, emphasis again, the many, the overwhelming many, can only be controlled by the few through this structure if we acquiesce to our own enslavement, and also if we are not aware that it's actually going on and how it works. Well, there's enough information now around the internet and other sources for that not to be an excuse. If you want to know how the world's controlled and what the agenda is, then you can find out. And if you're not bothering to do so, well, I repeat, you deserve to be enslaved. But do your children and do your grandchildren? Question worth asking ourselves. Pyramid and all-seeing eye on the dollar bill encapsulates so much about the way the world is controlled and how it's controlled. First of all, it seems that presidents and prime ministers and various people we allegedly vote into power are the ones that are making the decisions about our lives. Well, you don't have to do much research to realize that they are puppets of a force behind the scenes that the public never see, or if they do see them, they don't realize the significance of them. There is a network of families, interbreeding families that go back to the ancient world, and they have, through history, consistently expanded their power over the human race, and they've done this by constantly centralizing decision making. If you are the few, and they are the few, and you want to control the vast many, then you have to centralize decision making. You have to create a structure in which fewer and fewer and fewer people are making decisions affecting the lives of more and more and more people. The more you have diversity of decision making, like communities in Ecuador or regions of Ecuador deciding their own communities and deciding their own fate, making their own decisions, if you then have that going on in every country, well, how on earth are a few at the center going to control you? They can't. It's just too many points of decision making. So what these families have been doing century after century is constantly centralizing power. So there once was a time in the world where we had tribes, a tribal structure, where the people in the tribes were making decisions about what happened to them. Then there was a major shift when many different tribes in different areas of the world were brought together under what we call nations. Now, a few people at the center of that nation, what we call a government, actually the people behind the government, it's where the power is, are now dictating to the lives of all those former tribes in what we now call a country, so that the few are more and more making more and more decisions for the many. And what they're really looking for in this process is to create a situation where they have a world government which dictates to every country, a world army to impose the will of the world government on any countries that want to say no, a world currency which eventually wouldn't be cash at all, it would be just electronic money. And the reason for that is, if you now go into a store or a gas station, whatever, and you hand over electronic money and the computer system says no, it won't accept your card, then at least you can still pay cash. When they take cash out of circulation, that's the idea, then when that computer says no to your card, your electronic money, you have no other means to purchase except barter. They want a world central bank to dictate to all global finance, which is what this current economic crash is about. And they want a microchip population connected to the global satellite system. And in so many ways, the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill pyramid encapsulates all of this. First of all, these bloodlines have been using certain symbols right the way through history. So what you're actually looking at on the eye of the dollar bill is the eye of Ra, or the eye of Horus from ancient Egypt. It's a symbol they use. And that capstone of the pyramid, which is detached from the rest of the pyramid, certainly indicates A, the position of these elite interbreeding families, and B, the fact that they have access to knowledge about many, many things, including the nature of reality itself, which they pass on across the generations through the highest levels of a global secret society network and systematically keep it from the people. In another way, this pyramid fundamentally symbolizes the structure under which every country is subjugated and controlled in its people. And that is the structure of the pyramid within pyramid within pyramid. It's like Russian dolls, where you've got a smaller doll inside a bigger doll inside a bigger doll. The structure they've created is to structure everything as a pyramid. If you think of a government, a university, a school, a business, they're all structured as pyramids, like a bank, for instance. You've got the tiny few at the top of the bank who know what the bank's really there for, what it's trying to achieve, what its agenda is. And the further you go down from that peak in the bank, you're meeting more and more people in the bank who work for it, but as you go down, they know less and less and less about what the real agenda of the bank is and the real motivation of the bank is. So it's a structure that keeps people in the dark about what the people at the top know. And what that means is that all over the world, in banks and governments and businesses and media and all the rest of it, there are people going to work and making a contribution to their own enslavement and their children and grandchildren's enslavement without realizing that's what they're doing. Because if you look at this pyramid structure of organizations, people come in at these different levels of the pyramid here, and all they do is they go in and they do their job. They don't know how what they're doing connects with what they're doing and they're doing and they're doing and they're doing. They have no idea. They just contribute what they know. But the people here at the peak of the pyramid, they know how it all fits together. So they're seeing the picture, which is a very, very different one to what the individuals within the organization are doing. So take a bank. It is a pyramid in itself. When you go to a bank and you hand over a check at the counter, the person you're dealing with doesn't know what the bank manager in the office behind it knows and is doing. He doesn't know what the regional level of the bank is doing and knows. They don't know what the next level, and eventually there's a little cabal, the top of all these organizations, that they're the only ones that know the real story. So this bank then goes into a bigger pyramid, which encompasses all the banking system, all the banks. And at the top of that pyramid are a handful of interbreeding families, about 13 families, dominated by the House of Rothschild in Europe. Now, this means that you walk down the high street and you see Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays Bank in Britain, HSBC, and you think all these banks are in competition. They ain't. Because they're different masks on the same face. Because of this pyramid that encompasses all of them, these 13 families, dominated by the House of Rothschild, control the entire banking system. More than that, because governments are the same, they're structured as pyramids, and at the top of the pyramids are the same 13 families, it means that the families that control the banks control the treasury departments of the governments that are making the laws to govern the banks, which means that the banks, through this common control system, are deciding the laws of government over the banking system. And then you've got the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, again controlled by these same families, particularly the House of Rothschild, and they are dictating a common policy through all the central banks of the world. So, and I could go on and on and on about this, but already, people can see enough to understand how it is possible for a handful of families, and they're hierarchical too, some families more important than the others with the Rothschilds at the top, can dictate to the whole of global finance. Now, what does that mean? When you think that money is the vehicle through which people overwhelmingly eat, have a roof over their head, have choice in their life about what they want to do and what they can do, that means these 13 families, by controlling, they control much else besides, but by controlling the economic system globally alone, they are dictating the health, the opportunity, and the wealth or poverty of everyone on the planet.